All right, everybody. So this episode today is going to be continuing a conversation that we've been having here on the podcast. It started, it probably started last year, but I'm just going to go back a little bit in time because we had Rebecca Gordon on several weeks ago, kind of giving a big overview of the astrology of March and why it's such a significant moment. Then we had Natasha Alter. Natasha Alter came on and talked about the dance that Saturn and Neptune are doing this entire year. But a significant part of it is really amping up here in March. So we talked about that. Then we had Kaylin Castell on. We had Kaylin talk about why this March equinox that we are about to have is an extraordinarily important equinox moment. They always are, but this one is even more supercharged than usual. She also brought in the galactic center and this alignment that we have with the galactic center on a daily basis that now science is proving that opens up our capacity to receive information from other dimensional realms. Okay, so we talked about the equinox as a portal for that. We also talked about this daily galactic center alignment as a portal for that. Kaylin also brought up this idea of the lunar standstill and how the lunar standstill is also contributing to this moment in time where we are experiencing extremes, highs, lows, just an intensification of the energetic field, right? Gemini Brett is here to continue that piece of these threads that we've been weaving together. So we are going to be doing a very deep dive on the lunar standstill, what that is, why it matters, why it's significant, especially right now, and of course, what you can do with this information. With all of the guests we've had on, we've been focusing on not only the what, but who cares? Like, what does this mean for us? How can we use this information to actually ride these waves with some level of skill, with some level of awareness, maybe even some level of grace? I don't know. So, Brett, it is so great to have you back. I cannot believe how long it's been since we've had you on this podcast, and welcome. I'm so happy that you're here.
I'm so happy I'm here too. And Astrology Hub itself linked to this cycle, by the way, because we're currently in what they call Lunar Maximums. My first teachers, who were Daniel Jamario and Kaylin Castell, they prefer not to go with these terms, Lunar Maximums and Lunar Minimums, that most of the astronomers use today, but rather the outer standstill and the inner standstill. But when we were in the inner standstill of the cycle, that's the north node reaching 0 degrees tropical Libra. And that was November 11th, 2015. And then the outer or the lunar maximums are when the north node reaches 0 degrees tropical Aries. And that was January 11th, 2025. So to my understanding, Astrology Hub was born in 2015, right?
Yes, and I bet we were doing our first event in around that November. We had our first summit. So we officially started in that summer of 2015, but I think probably things were really starting to get going that fall. So what I want to say is this episode is perfect for any of you who love bridging the science, you love bridging the astronomy with your astrological curiosity. You want to know the tangible, how can we show that these cycles are correlated? How do they impact life here on Earth in tangible, measurable ways? So if you're like that, this is going to be the episode for you. And hopefully you already know Gemini Brett, who is one of the leaders, I would say, in the field of astrology in bringing astronomy into the conversation, really closing the gap between astrology and astronomy, which if you've been hanging out with us for a while, you know that astrology and astronomy used to be married, very happily married for centuries. And it's only really in sort of recent history that they have become divorced and sort of not the happiest divorce, not the most harmonious divorce. And so I am very keen on bridging the gap. Brett is very keen on bridging the gap. And one of the things that's perfect for this episode is that I get to announce one of our newest sponsors of the show, which is High Point Scientific. They are an astronomy company focused on astronomical gear, like telescopes, like gear that you might need for astrophotography, all those amazing things. And we are their first ever astrology partner. Astrology, so this is a huge deal. And for any of you who are looking for telescopes, you're looking for astrophotography gear, please use the links in the show notes, because then we're going to be showing them that, look, hey, astrology is interested in legitimate astronomy as well. We're interested in doing those things. So I would love for this partnership to be extraordinarily successful for them. And then they'll be blown away. And then maybe at some point we can get married again.
Yeah, I've come to really feel that astronomy and astrology are different things, but that in a way they're two sides of one coin. I mean, actually, what we call astrology these days would have been called correspondences back in the day. And where astrology would be the rainbow bridge or the sacred science or the high art between astronomy and correspondences. So astronomy being the measurable heavenly happenings, right? The things we can put a ruler to. Many of us went and saw Jupiter conjoin Saturn on December 21st, 2020, and they were very close, and you could see it in the sky with your eyes. But how did that dance you versus how did that dance me? And then we go to the natal chart and see where that is and where we are in our life cycle activations and all those things, and that beautiful sacred science, at least as I would say, of astrology, which kind of then bridges us between that measurable side of the heavenly happenings, the astronomy, and the immeasurable correspondences, right? So just like with sound, right? Or let me say noise, right? So for me, noise is something that vibrates the medium. It can be measured, right? There's an amplitude, there's frequency in these things, right? But harmony would be the sacred science that connects us between that measurable noise and sound, which I define as the immeasurable quality of that noise, right? So here's this music. It might call you in. It might inspire me to run away at light speed, right? Because you are you and I am me, right? And that's where we have in the sacred science tradition called the quadrivium, these different, as I call them, like bridges between the measurable quantity and the immeasurable quality. So for me, astronomy itself, like, why did we start keeping the days and really tracking the sun and the moon? Probably because the nomads wanted to know when to go, right? And how to get there, which is following the stars and the like. Once we were agricultural, I mean, you can go all the way back to Hesiod's works in days, right? More than 2,000 years ago, that beautiful work that talks about, planting and harvesting according to which stars are rising before the sun in the morning. And of course, we have traditions like that from all of the cultures, and that's astronomy. But once you start watching that intently, something's bound to happen to you. Unless you're like doing really well with those rigid walls of a paradigm that tells you there's no such thing as correspondences, and how could stars so far away have anything to do with the human experience? And, Jupiter doesn't have any gravitational pull on you. Like there's an argument that's made by rationalists, which is that somebody standing in the room where you were delivered has more of a gravitational force on you than Jupiter did in that moment, at least according to Newtonian physics. That being said, we measure where the planets are in the signs, not from the surface of the Earth, where we live and breathe and can witness these heavenly happenings, but from the center of the Earth, right? That place where all earthlings are one. And in that sense, the chart's telling us about our experience of Earth's experience of the heavens. And there's no scientist in the world who's going to deny that Jupiter has an extreme energetic effect on Earth, and I would suggest, therefore, on all Earthlings. Now, where we are on the surface of Earth, of course, matters, and that shows up in astrology in the houses. So right now, it's daytime, the sun is above the ground, but in other places on Earth in the same moment, the sun is below. And as I investigate like very real, tangible, materialistic ways that the measurable heavenly happenings clearly have energetic participation with me personally and with all beings, I like to start with day and night. Because whether you're like a alpha alert daytime person or you're working the so-called graveyard shift, we have different experiences at 3 p.m. than we do at 3 a.m. or at noon and midnight. And that's undeniable. And we can get into the ancient systems of, I don't know, like the Organ calendar and such, or clock during the day. But like everybody knows that daytime and nighttime hit different, right? And that's astronomy. And the Earth is spinning, so the sun rises and reaches and rests and roots, and we go through different energetic experiences, and there's much available scientific measurement to show you that your hormones during the course of day and night, and et cetera, like nobody needs to argue about that. But I think we don't consider like, wow, that's just clear evidence that astronomical cycles have energetic influence on human beings. Agreed?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the next place we might go is the tides. Okay, so let me just like rewind, and I think I'll show more about why and what it is. But just know that the Lunar Standstill Cycle, it's about the transit of the zodiac by the lunar nodes. Okay, so the lunar nodes are where the moon's path intersects with the sun's path. Right? What is the sun's path? It's the ecliptic. It's the heart of the zodiac. And really, that's Earth's path, right? As Earth orbits the sun, it describes a plane. But from Earth, we witness that plane by witnessing the sun traveling through our sky, right? Because the sun is on that plane. Now, I like to call that the circle of spirit because it's where the sun lives. And I think of Earth as matter. And so the ecliptic's about matter and spirit. And of course, most, scientists of our day and age don't want to go there, and that's okay. But the ecliptic is no doubt like the heart of the zodiac. If we extend that towards infinity in every direction, we will find the constellations of the zodiac. They embrace the ecliptic plane, and therefore, the sun is always traveling through one of those 12 star groups from our point of view, right? But also, how are you ever going to know what stars the sun is aligned with? You'll go blind trying. And I really feel like astrologers don't stop to consider that truth because we spend so much time looking at the sky on a chart instead of looking at the sky in the sky. And then at some point you're like, oh, wait, the sun's crazy bright, right? So you can see the stars rising before the sun, and that will tell you the constellation that the sun's used to be in. And you can see the stars that are setting right after the sun once it gets dark enough. And like that's where the sun is going next. And you can kind of dream into that a little bit. But this is why all of the original zodiacs were lunar, because you can actually follow the moon right through the stars. So systems of lunar mansions, right, in India, that's called nakshatras. In the Babylonian system, and you look at the Mula Pin as like the proto-zodiac, but they were looking at 18 or 17 or some say 19 star groups that describe the path of the moon, as it was called. I mean, look, planting and sowing with the phases of the moon is really powerful. We actually see some positive results from doing so, the biodynamic farming, etc. But you better honor the cycles of Earth and Sun first and foremost. right? If you like things like life. Because whether you're a nomadic people, if you want to know when to go, because every time of year the berries are ripe over there, or the herd of elk come over there at this time of year, that's a solar thing, right? Or if you're agricultural, I mean, first and foremost, that's a solar thing. Now, there's probably 12 signs because there's about 12 lunations in a year. But I mean, you've been with the, Astrology Hub inner circle, obviously from the beginning, and you've been following lunar cycles for long enough to know that it's really weird and tricky. There's actually 12.37 lunations point per year. And
Yes, sometimes we need 12 astrologers in a year, and sometimes we need 13.
exactly, right. And it's kind of like 12 and a half each year once you start tuning into it, or 12 and a third. And so keeping like lunisolar or solilunar time, like many calendar systems, like the Hebrew, which comes from the Babylonian, from the Akkadian, the Chinese solilunar calendar, for example, they have a system of intercalary months, kind of like leap months. And that's going to take us in a whole other direction, and we'll be talking about that for an hour, but it's a really beautiful place to go. And actually, it's a wonderful thing to invoke too, because as you know, here we've recently shifted from a year of a dragon to a year of a snake or serpent. And for the astrologically inclined, that sounds like eclipses, and it sounds like nodes. And I'll show you why. The north and south node are called the dragon's head and the dragon's tail, or the head of the serpent and the tail of the serpent as well, because it really has to do with the moon snaking above and below the path of the sun. So let's go there. The ecliptic is the sun's path, but for the most part, because our solar system is relatively flat, the planets travel that path too. Now, Professor Pluto actually diverges by like 17 degrees from the sun's path during the course of his like 250-year-ish cycle. And it's one of the many reasons why the white coats demoted Pluto to dwarf planet status in 2005. But the rest of the planets stay close. The moon every month snakes, every draconic month, which is the moon's month with the node. So think of the period of like moon at north node back to moon at north node. That's about 27 days. The moon will snake above and below the path of the sun every month and diverge by about 5 degrees north and south. And I'm going to get back to that because for people who are watching this, I'll show you some cool images and animations that I built around that. But the important truth of the lunar standstill cycle is that we're following the intersection points of the circle of silver and gold, which for me is the moon's path and the sun's path. And we're tracking those lunar nodes as they move around the zodiac. The lunar nodes tend to retrograde their way around the zodiac during a period of 18 and a half years. It's actually 18.6 years, but who's counting? I am. And it's actually 18.618 years. And though nerdy that sounds, it's intriguing, especially for those of us who study another one of the sacred sciences of old called geometry, because the golden number these days, usually described by phi and phi, is 1.618. It's a transcendent number like pi is, right? And so when I hear 18.618, I'm like, ooh, there's something quite golden in that. And something quite silver, because gold would be the sacred metal for the sun and silver that for the moon. Okay. So I'm going to bring your awareness to some like scientific papers from modern times telling you the power of the cycle. And then we'll go way, way back and see that ancients around the world were building monuments to track this cycle. And we might get to ask why. Does that sound all right?
It sounds great, but Brett, can we bring it back to this moment in time? Why are we talking about the lunar standstill right now? Is it because we are in one, if that's the right way to say it?
Yeah. So another wonderful thing about the lunar standstill cycle is these things I'm about to show you. It's all about the tropical zodiac. And many, many, many people, including professional astrologers, will tell you there's no astronomy to the tropical zodiac because the tropical signs are not aligned with the constellations like they once were. And because the 12 star groups that embrace the ecliptic plane, the constellational zodiac, those constellations vary significantly in size. So you really can't map them to any equal zodiac. And there are many different zodiacs, sidereal, star-based zodiacs, or tropical, which are based on what? Well, I think I'll show you. As we look at the very real and measurable and analyzed climate effects of this 18.6-year nodal cycle, it's all about tracking the nodes through the tropical zodiac, which I will show you why I call it Earth's zodiac. All right, so when the North Node every 18.6 years reaches 0 degrees tropical Aries, that's the center point of the lunar maximums. So I'll just tell you a few times that's happened in recent history. December 1st, 1987. That's the true North Node, not the mean North Node. If you know the difference of the calculations, I try not to be mean and I try to tell the truth. So December 1st, 1987, 18.6 years later was June 22nd, 2006. And then just recently, January 11th, 2025. So that's why we're talking about it now. We know right now there's all of these crossings of this Pisces Aries cusp, right? In fact, many, because Mercury and Venus, who have both moved from Pisces into Aries, retrograde, and moving back into Pisces, where they will go direct and move into Aries again. And a kind of longer period, same thing with Saturn, who later this year of 2025 will move from Pisces after a few years into Aries, but then retrograde and head back to Pisces for some unfinished business. Well, Neptune's been in Pisces since 2012. And is just now in 2025 and quite soon moving into Aries, but will retrograde, head back into Pisces. So there's a lot of energy at this very interesting point where many see to be the beginning of the zodiac circle, right? It begs this interesting geometry puzzle of like which point in the circumference of a circle is the beginning of the circumference of the circle. Well, if you draw a circle, it's where you started and ended, I guess. But many of us in astrology look at this 0 Aries point of the tropical zodiac to be the beginning and the ending of the beginning of the ending of the beginning of the ending again. There's a very important secret of why that is, which shouldn't be a secret at all. So let me just say this, like so many sacred systems of ancient wisdom traditions, the tropical zodiac is directionally aligned. Nobody knows this. It's like the thing I'm most devoted to helping astrologers remember, and my devotion to bring more of the astronomy back to astrologers. The Earth's North Pole, which literally just defines north as our rotational axis, right? So it's not magnetic north and south. I'm talking about Santa's place, right? Like terrestrial north and south pole. Those are just the point that our rotational axis is, passing through. And the North Pole leans north forever and ever, ever, not towards the Crab constellation, that changes with precession, but towards 0 Cancer. And because that does, when the sun ingresses Cancer, the sun's shining directly above Earth's Tropic of Cancer. Like, is that not astronomy? Absolutely. When the sun ingresses Capricorn, the sun is shining directly above Earth's Tropic of Capricorn. Okay, and so the Tropic of Capricorn is the point of the ecliptic that Earth's south pole is always leaning towards. the zero Cancer, tropical Cancer, right? Cardinal directions of Earth, cardinal cusps, all tropical zodiac, not sidereal. This isn't about Ophiuchus. The North Pole of Earth is leaning towards zero Cancer. That's the north point. East and West are a little bit more confusing because in any moment, East in California, where I am, and East in Hawaii, where you are, they're different, right? We have a different rising sign right now. But from the center of the Earth, where we are all connected, right? That heart of Gaia, there's a global north, that's zero Cancer. There's a global south, that's zero Capricorn. And therefore, there's also a global west, that's zero Libra. That's why the Libra glyph looks like a setting sun, the ultimate image of the west. Once you see that, you can't go back. So I'm sorry I didn't warn you. Then zero Aries, the Pisces Aries cusp of the tropical zodiac, is due east of the center of Earth. And therefore, it works like a global ascendant. That's the mystical key behind the turning of the ages. Why, when we trace that east point, zero tropical Aries, through the constellations or perhaps through sidereal signs, we move from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And that, of course, is a very long conversation we could have another time if you'd like, right? But it's also why we say, like, when the sun reaches zero Aries, this is the beginning of the astrological year. And by the way, astronomers do too. They just don't call it zero Aries.
Okay, everybody. Eventually, we're going to have a way for you to do this. But if there's some way for you to dog ear what Brett just shared with us about the tropical zodiac and what it's based on and why it is astronomically based, please do it. Because I don't know about you, but I've definitely gotten into conversations. I was recently up at a field trip with my daughter. There were astronomers there and telescopes. It was awesome. However, I met an astronomer who, once I told her what I do for work, she just annihilated me. I mean, she just went on and on and on about how astrology is so BS and how do astrologers not even know that their zodiac is all out of whack and blah, blah, blah. Had I been able to reiterate, of course, I wished Gemini Brett was with me, but he wasn't. Had I been able to articulate what Brett just shared, I think a bridge would have formed between me and this woman who she just automatically despised me. So maybe there was no chance for a bridge, but it doesn't matter. I would have at least felt like, okay, I was able to speak to this very common rebuttal about why astrology is a bunch of BS. So thank you for that. And it was such a beautiful, perfect explanation. I've probably heard you say this 20 times, but I don't know about all of you. I need to hear it at least that many times before I can really absorb it. But if you're listening on the podcast, Brett was also using a visual to describe what he was saying. So you might want to head over to YouTube. If you're invested in this conversation, you might want to head over to YouTube so you can see the visual of what he was just describing, because it definitely helped me.
That visual, by the way, is called an armillary sphere that I'm holding in my hand here. I had to take this one apart and put it back together to make it more accurate, and it's still not quite precise. If you look up armillary sphere, you can find a lot of things that you could purchase and put in your home, and they look pretty cool, and they're all wrong. And it's really sad to me. It's like I have not been able to find one that is accurate yet.
Right. This is a great business idea for you.
Yeah, I don't know how many armillary spheres I'm going to be slanging.
Well, after this episode, I'm going to want one. So,
but at the same time, I have thought about it, and it's something. If anyone is a metal worker, especially, or a woodworker, I'd love to speak with you about it, because I like creating some of these old and beautiful devices that really help us understand more about the marriage of heaven and earth is something I'm very called towards. So, but let me just show you in this armillary sphere, what you see is Earth's equator, okay? And that's the plane of our daily spin, right? You also see some other parallels, as we call them, or significant bands of earthly latitude, equator being zero latitude, right? You're going north from there. This is the Tropic of Cancer, right? Which is like 23.5 degrees north. of the equator, where the Tropic of Capricorn is 23.5 degrees south of the equator. 23.5 degrees because that's the tilt angle of Earth in our day and age. What tilt? The tilt between the equator, which is the plane of the day, and the ecliptic, which is the plane of the year, right? Earth's rotational plane is tilted in respect to our orbital plane, and that's the reason for the seasons. And over great periods of time, 40,000 years plus, that angular distance between the two does change slightly. In our day and age, it's like 23.5 degrees. Which, by the way, speaking of golden numbers, for those of you who are familiar with the Fibonacci sequence 11235, you get the 235, so the 23.5 degrees. That being said, it's actually closer to 23.4. But if you honor that, then you have to realize that the complementary angle is 66.6, and nobody wants to say that shit. But that is the latitude of the Arctic Circle, which is also here on this armillary sphere, and south of the equator, the Antarctic Circle, right?
So basically, the tropical zodiac is directional.
Yeah.
It is based on the Earth's true north,
leaning towards zero Cancer.
Leaning towards zero Cancer.
Yeah.
Earth's true south, leaning towards the Tropic
Zero Capricorn. Yeah.
Okay. And then from the center of the Earth, the east and west points, which is Libra, 0 degrees Libra, and 0 degrees
west, and 0 Aries is east.
East.
Which, by the way, especially go up to Haleakala and watch the stars rise in the middle of the night.
Yes.
And you'll see that the stars, when you're looking east, trace patterns that look like a ram's horns.
You've shown me that before.
Yeah.
It's
a real, I first saw that on Haleakala, which is obviously a very appropriate place to have that experience. The closer you get to the equator, the easier it is to see that. I'm 38 degrees north of the equator. I have to tilt my head 38 degrees to really see that shape. So yeah, that's it. And then let me show you a few other things that really will help you like feel into this, right? So the tropical zodiac is on one level all about the tropicos. So what is that? That's Greek for turnaround. What turns around? Well, every year the sun does twice. All right. So the sun's on the path of the ecliptic, the plane of the year, the orbital path. All right. And only the tropical zodiac is looking at the relationship between these two planes, the plane of the year, the ecliptic or the orbital plane, or even we can call that signs, and the plane of the day, which is about moving the planets through the houses. And the ecliptic passes over the equator, and I use that term purposefully, at 0 Aries. It's the east point. Okay. And then it gets most north at the Tropic of Cancer. Okay. Well, why is that tropicos turnaround? So what is solstice? Solstice means the sun stops. Stops what? Well, every year the sun will move from Capricorn solstice, or I like to call it southstice, because that's when the sun is at its southern bounds. Okay, the southern bounds are the Tropic of Capricorn. So every year the sun journeys south, just like migratory birds. All right, it calls me to honor a friend I want to bring over here as I say that. It reaches its southern extreme, the Tropic of Capricorn, where the sun stops its southern journey. It turns around, tropicos, and then slowly begins to head north for 6 months, crossing the equator at 0 Aries, Aries equinox, equator, and then continuing north through Aries, Taurus, and Gemini until it reaches the northern extreme, which is 0 Cancer at the Tropic of Cancer, tropic, tropicos, turnaround, and then the sun heads south.
Do you call it a northstice?
I do call it a northstice, but it doesn't quite have the ring to it. Just like I now call March, or I'd prefer to say Aries equinox, east equinox, because that's when the sun is due east of the center of Earth. And that has a nice ring to it. West equinox, that's the sun at 0 Libra, not as much.
Brett, because you're helping to put it in the language so we can remember it. And then once we remember it, we can start to actually feel these things and feel them in our bodies. But because the language is so it's so disconnected from like the language we use every day, it's hard to draw these connections. I don't know about all of you, but it's hard for me, especially because we're here on Earth. We don't see these things happening the way we would if we had a different vantage point. You know, if we could look from outside in. So it's sometimes feels like fish describing water. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But I love that you're weaving it into the language. It's good and helpful.
Right. And what are the ways that we typically differentiate one solstice and the other? Well, summer solstice and winter solstice.
Right.
But act locally, think globally. My summer solstice is Australia's winter solstice, right? And so then we'll say June solstice and December solstice, but why do I need to coin these in Gregorian or Julian calendar language? Why not speak the language in which I train? And so it's Cancer solstice and Capricorn solstice. Well, really importantly, that does not mean constellational crab and constellational sea goat. But doesn't it mean crab, which I'll get back to, and goat? So let's talk about the goat. All right. Why is it winter solstice for me when the sun's in 0 Capricorn? Because the sun is furthest from me. Like literally. And I should say me, I live in California. I'm in the northern hemisphere, right? So the southern bounds of the sun's annual journey are the Tropic of Capricorn. The sun is furthest from me at that time, and therefore it's lowest in my sky during midday for the whole year. And then slowly the sun, day by day, as the days grow longer, from the longest night, is going to climb that mountain, just like a goat. And for those of you who live down under, and that summer solstice for you, the sun in 0 Capricorn, because it's closest to you, just think about like when you're walking towards a building, it appears to get taller. The sun's walking towards you if you live in the southern hemisphere, and it's coming to the Tropic of Capricorn, closest to you, right? And so it's higher in your sky. Well, goats need to climb down too. And what's even further than down? The bottom of the sea. Do you know there are crabs called Yeti crabs that live as far beneath sea level as the peak of Mount Everest is above?
Wow.
That's a fun one.
Yeti crabs?
Yeti crabs.
Awesome.
Living down there at like these thermal vents at the very bottom of the ocean, right? Okay. Well, I'm going to show you this beautiful image from Kemet, the land we now call Egypt. This is Jehuti, who many of you will know as Thoth or Thoth or Tot. Thought, by the way, is a pronunciation for this being who kept the days and brought us astrology and brought us language and number and much, much more. And many of you will have seen Thought represented by the ibis bird. Well, I might be an important part of that, but some say this is because the ibis bird has a beak that's shaped somewhat like a crescent moon. But there was another netter, you might say God, but they didn't, of the moon, that's Khonsu, right? For Thought, it's moon and sun because astronomy, astrology, all of the things that happen through these correspondences, okay? Well, many don't know that Thought was also symbolized by baboon, okay? So why the two? For me, ibis bird, because that's a migratory bird, right? So what happens in Egypt is this bird of the Nile flies south for the winter time, just like the sun. All right. So for me, the ibis is depicting the annual happening of Ra, of the sun. Well, the baboon daily, because troops of baboon every morning will literally compete for high ground So the winner will first receive the rays of the rising sun, right? Sun's rising, that's the beginning of the sun's journey through the houses every day, right? Sun through the signs, migration, ibis bird, sun through the houses, celebrating that in the morning, the baboon, right? And this is where we get in this tradition, the calendar. In the Western tradition, Jehuti would really be seen as Hermes or as Mercury. Okay. So the sun every year is kind of making this wave, and it's journeying to its southern extreme, the Tropic of Capricorn, stopping and turning around, which is what solstice means, standstill of the sun. And then it crosses the equator at equinox or eastquinox, gets to its northern extreme, northstice, Cancer solstice, stops and turns around and starts heading south for 6 months, crossing the equator southward at 0 Libra, west equinox, right? Now, that's every year for the sun. It takes Jupiter 12 years to make that journey. Who makes that journey most quickly? And the answer is the moon. Right. So if you start seeing the truth of the directional zodiac, which the tropical zodiac is, you just get to see that the moon is orbiting the Earth. It's a model we use, by the way. Really, the Earth and the moon are dancing with one another as together they orbit the sun. A friend of mine, Paul, shows that as like kind of the father-daughter dance, which of course I love more now than I used to, right? Because the moon is like smaller than the Earth. And so there's a way where the Earth's kind of swinging the moon around. But the model that we're taught in school, that the Earth's orbited by the moon while orbiting the sun, will work. Especially for this, just look at the moon going around the Earth and getting to the North Pole lean. A couple of weeks later to the South Pole lean. Like that's just the moon moving from Cancer to Capricorn. Okay. But the moon is not tied to the sun's path, to the ecliptic plane. Right? If my arm here, for those of you who are watching this video, is the ecliptic or the sun's path or the heart of the zodiac, every month the moon snakes above and below and diverges by about 5 degrees. Okay, and that's happening every month forever. But there are times where that snaking motion, or maybe that feels like a tidal motion, are most interesting. And they would be when the lunar nodes reach the equinox points. So whether that's the north node at 0 Libra, which last happened on 11/11/2015, or the north node at 0 Aries, which just happened on January 11th, 2025. Those are respectively north node at 0 Libra, the lunar minimums, and north node at 0 Aries, the lunar maximums. So what's minimum and what's maximum? I want to get to some of these, a little relief from all the astronomy talk. It just can be too overwhelming. And let me just share with you some actual measurable events on Earth about this thing.
As Brett's bringing this up, I just want to mention that we wanted Brett to do an in-depth lunar standstill episode because it's really coloring the experiences we're all having here in this moment in time. And we're going to be spending 2 hours with 5 astrologers, including Brett, on Tuesday, March 18th, talking about how to work with all this convergence of energies that we're experiencing right now. We're going to be talking about the different qualities that we can cultivate within ourselves to really effectively work and ride these waves. And so it'll be Gemini Brett, Kaylin Castell, Natasha Alter, Ari Moshe Wolf, and Nora Rochelle. So these 5 beautiful, incredible souls, brilliant astrologers, we will be in discussion. We want this to be an intimate conversation with all of you. You are all invited. It is a give as you wish event. So you can donate as much as you want, as nothing if you want. It's a give as you wish. And so it's open to everybody. Invite your friends, anybody who's going through it, anybody who's like, what is going on? Anybody who is really wanting to step into this next phase of life with as much awareness as possible. Everybody's invited. It's going to be an incredible conversation, and it'll be a lot more English. So today is going to be like the most technical we're going to get. We're going to way peel it back from here and really be speaking English and really be translating. Okay, so what does all this mean? What does it all mean, and how do we work with it most effectively? What are the opportunities available to all of us right now? The more awareness and intentionality we bring to our lives. And as far as I can tell, and talking to all these amazing astrologers, there's huge opportunity right now. There's also a very big, if you're not aware, if you're not bringing intentionality into your every single day reality, this is the time where you can get swept up into a lot of other kinds of currents that you might not want to be swept up in. So we're going to help you stay focused. All right, go to astrologyhub.com/change. Astrologyhub.com/change. The event is called Navigating Change. And it's all about aligning with the wisdom, the cosmic wisdom to, like I said, surf the waves.
Yeah, and there's change, which can be tricky, and there's rate of change.
Right.
Right, which is something we don't consider enough, I think, right? For the physicists, it's the difference between velocity and acceleration, all right?
Right. And the amount of change everybody's having to absorb all at once, that actually, I agree. Maybe we should have called it navigating accelerated change. But that's the tricky part. It's like it's happening so fast you can barely get your breath. You can't really hold on to anything. So,
right. And importantly, it won't stay that way. And it's supposed to be this way. And sometimes it's really helpful knowing that, right? And it's one of the reasons why following these rhythms can be very helpful. There's ways where it can actually be the furthest thing from helpful and actually cause even more fear and worry and the like, right? But an important thing to know right now, just energetically, is that this time is meant to be massively tidal. And by that, I mean big waves, all right, and big peaks and big troughs. Yeah. And, I mean, like the surfers wait for that and they run out there. And, so this is one of the things that we go to if we want to prove astrology, or let me say it in this way, that astronomical cycles influence our energetic experiences. Earthlings, again, I like to start with night and day, but we often will speak to the tides, right? And we'll say things like, well, Earth is 70% water, and so am I. Now, every month we have 2 periods of the highest high tides. They call them the spring tides or the king tides. And that is when the moon is conjunct the sun, new moon, or when the moon is opposite the sun, full moon, right? Now, not every full moon's created equally in regards to tides. Some of that depends on how far the moon is from the earth. That's a different cycle that I'm not going to speak so much about today. Okay. But also in between new and full moon, whether it's the waxing half moon or the waning half moon. Amanda, of course, you know that in Hawaii, these are both called the olis, right? The oli stages of the phases. That's when we get the neap tides. So that's the lowest high tides and the highest low tides. Or let me call it like this, the least high tides and the least low of the low tides during the month, right? So new moon and full moon, peak tides. Now, the highest high tides of the year will be the new and the full moons in Cancer and Capricorn. And by the way, that's not sidereal. That's nothing about Ophiuchus, though I love that constellation. This is about Earth's zodiac, the Tropical Zodiac, which hopefully I'm showing you is very much an astronomical, or I like to say an earth-astronomical thing, okay? So if you're, tied to the Gregorian thing, then basically December and June when the sun's in Capricorn and Cancer respectively, regardless of whether you're northern or southern hemisphere, you get your seasonally highest high new and full moons and lowest low new and full moon tides of the year. Okay. But what about the 18.6-year cycle? So I just wanted to show you some actual measurable thing. You know, the lunar nodes, one funny thing here is like I'm often looking for astrological information, and I'll have to kind of weed my way through a bunch of astronomy papers about Jupiter or whatever, which I also love. With the lunar nodes, it is so hard to find astronomical papers because astrology's gotten so high on lunar nodes in the last 100 years that like you search lunar nodes online and you get all this astrology, mostly evolutionary astrology stuff, right? And interestingly, at this lunar standstill time, the astrologers you just mentioned that we'll be in council with coming up, like Ari Moshe Wolf, Nora Rochelle, Natasha Alter, like these are evolutionary astrologers, very nodal-based astrologers, right? So anyway, I'm having a hard time finding astronomy papers on the nodes. Like I haven't yet cracked the code of why the nodes move retrograde. And it's really, it annoys me, right? But I'll get there eventually. So, but I did want to show this. This one's from the Journal of Geophysical Research on Oceans. And here's the headline: Global Influences of the 18.61-year nodal cycle and 8.85-year cycle of lunar perigee on high tidal levels. Okay, so the tides, that perigee situation, that's actually astrologically about Lilith, and it's the close moon, the super moon, and the far moon, the micro moon, and that's a tale for another time. But just know that we have measurable events on Earth where we have the highest high tides and the lowest low tides every 18.61 years as the North Node transits around the zodiac, when the North Node reaches 0 Aries and when the North Node reaches 0 Libra. We're in the peaks of this cycle. We're in that now. And so I'll just say it this way: the year of 2024 and year of 2025 is meant to be massively tidal. So if you're feeling overwhelmed in that regard, you're doing it right. And hopefully just knowing that will help you surf instead of being pulled into the undertow, okay? Here's one from Ichiro Yasuda. I'm not sure what the period, it's from Nature. Impact of the astronomical lunar 18.6-year tidal cycle on El Nino. All right, now I haven't yet found one for the Santa Ana winds, but I bet you it's there. And if we knew that because the North Node's now at 0 Aries, the Santa Anas are going to be more extreme, I don't know, maybe we would have the reservoirs filled. Moving on. I just missed one. So here's European Geosciences Union, the modeled climatic response to the 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle and its role in decadal temperature trends. Okay, so the surface temperatures of Earth with this 18.61-year cycle. So if you're feeling hot and cold, you're supposed to, right? Like, all right, so here's one from the Ecological Society of America: regulation of salt marsh mosquito populations by the 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle. Okay, people have actually tracked pandemics to this because mosquitoes and other bugs, all right? That would be kind of a different image than the one we all recently knew about, but that's going to come up too. But I just want to rewind a bunch of slides and show you some pretty amazing places on Earth.
Okay, so what you're showing us, Brett, just let me make sure we're all tracking with you. You're showing us impacts of these maximums and minimums of the lunar nodes and the impact that those have measurably, tangibly on things like our climate, on things like the tides, on things here on Earth. This is measurable. This isn't like we're just making something up. And what you're saying is that because we are also 70% water, it's probably having impact on our internal tides. It's probably having impact on our own physiology, but then also the ripple effects into all the aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. And whether this is affecting us because we're made of water as well, it's a little bit harder to say whether or not the moon is completely pulling on all like the liquid in me. I'm sure it is. A wonderful thing to remember is that while the sun has much more of a gravitational pull, the moon has more of a tidal pull because tides are about gravity too, but it's the difference in the gravity between the near side and the far side. Okay. And the near side and the far side of Earth, from Moon's perspective, have a much greater difference than from the sun's perspective because the sun is so far away. So the moon actually has like twice as much tidal effect on us than the sun does, but the tides are about the moon and the sun, right? And so it brings us really into, from my point of view, Earth, moon, and sun, or cross, crescent, and circle, or matter, soul, and spirit. So absolutely, yes, like in those papers, we're seeing that there's measurable effects of where the north nodes are, the lunar nodes are in the zodiac.
Wow.
And I love that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. You were about to show something else, something that was moving.
Let me do that. All right, we're going to go through kind of a quick image of many of the slides I put together while teaching these things for my school of Earth astrology. Now y'all know why I call it that. Okay, so we're going to look at this wave. Speaking of waves, you are here. Let's get a clicker. So why so much dragon tales with eclipses? Dragons eating the sun or dragons eating the moon? Why so much serpent stuff? Because, as I said before, every month the moon snakes above and below the path of the sun, and the crossing points are the lunar nodes. Have you ever seen this, Amanda? That the glyph that we use these days to depict the south lunar node, Rahu, is actually found on the hood of King Cobra.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Okay, but now if you're an astro geek and you're listening, you got to go over to YouTube just for this one visual. That's amazing. Wow.
Especially for this visual, which is, look, you can see the lunar nodes in every slithering snake, right?
God, I had no idea that the lunar node, of course, all the glyphs have such deep meaning. I just never unpacked that one.
And what's the snaking? It's the moon snaking above and below the path of the sun, or to be more global, north and south of the sun. All right. So every month, or really draconic month, the moon will move south of the sun's path and peak at what it's called southern bending. And then it will cross the sun's path at the north node. And about a week later, it will reach its extreme north, about 5 degrees north of the sun's path at the northern bending. And then it crosses back into the southern place. This is called celestial latitude, by the way, north or south of the ecliptic of the sun's path. And it's like this every month. This is why most new moons are no moons and there's no eclipse, because depending on where you're looking from on Earth, the moon's either above the sun or below the sun. Right? The sun needs to be near a lunar node, as it is 2 seasons each year, for us to experience shadow play, right? Because then when the moon meets the sun is right in front of the sun and we experience a solar eclipse, right? Or the full moon is on the ecliptic plane, and that's where the Earth's shadow is always projected, exactly opposite of where the sun is, okay? Now that snaking you just saw of moon north and south of the Earth, I call that one of the 2 caduceus staffs of Earth astrology. The caduceus being the staff we often see Hermes holding, right, of the 2 serpents intertwined. The other staff is that of the solar serpent, And we've been speaking about this the whole time. Every year, the sun will get to its northern extreme, the Tropic of Cancer, where it stops and turns around and goes to its southern extreme. All right. Now, this is a different snaking. This is a snaking in what's called declination, which is a measurement north or south of Earth's equator, the plane of day. Okay. And you can see, for those of you who are watching on video, this snaking, the sine wave graph down there at the bottom, that's declination, right? So 0 Aries and 0 Libra, that's like the x-axis. That's 0 declination. That's on the equator. And then 0 Cancers at the northern peak of the wave and 0 Capricorns at the southern peak of the wave, right? So what happens when the sun's at its southern peak? Goat. Well, then just really importantly, when the sun ingresses into tropical Capricorn, the sun in that moment shines directly above Earth's Tropic of Capricorn. Now, like, how astronomical is that? It is elegant, beautiful. I mean, I'd say simple, that can be offensive until we get this, and it's hard to get. It's like science stuff. That's not what we came to astrology for, you know. But anyway, so the goat's going to climb the mountain. I want to show this to you on an astro map. I've circled, for those of you watching in video, this Capricorn sun on Earth's Tropic of Capricorn. All right. And I'm going to, in this year of 2024, that's depicted, that happened, the sun was directly above like Madagascar. But the Earth spins. Right. And during the course of that day, the sun will illuminate from directly above every location on Earth's Tropic of Capricorn. Right. But even as we're moving through the days there, now the sun's at like 2 degrees Capricorn. It's very slowly heading north. It had to stop, right, put it in reverse and slowly pick up speed in the other direction. Right. But as I move through days now, you're just going to see pretty quickly the sun heading north. It's going to cross the equator as the sun goes into Aries. Taurus is further north of the equator. Gemini is most north of the equator because that will take us to the northern extreme, 0 Cancer, where the sun stops and starts heading south for 6 months. 6 sunths, I should say, right? And the sun through 6 signs. Right, in the southern extreme, 0 Capricorn, and then the sun heads north again. Like, this is a very elegant and beautiful thing. And hopefully you can see like the snake in the screen here too, right? So there's a solar serpent as well. Of course, when the sun gets to 0 Cancer, for northern hemisphere places, that's the height of the light. Some say the glory of the king. Right, the highest sun and therefore the shortest shadow of the year. And then what happens? The sun gets lower. The midday sun every day is going to be lower in the sky until it's at its lowest at winter solstice. And climb again. Well, that's the Gemini glyph. The sun goes up for 6 months and down for 6 months. All right. Well, I want to show you the Cancer glyph and talk about the crabs. But first, let me show you this. This is an out of bounds moon that's depicted on the screen. For those of you who are still listening, I'll try to describe this in words that will do the trick, okay? What is an out of bounds moon or an out of bounds Mercury or Venus or whatever? The answer is a planet that has gone beyond the bounds of the sun. What are the bounds of the sun? The tropics of Capricorn, the southern bounds, and Cancer, the northern.
At 23.5 degrees?
Exactly, of declination or terrestrial latitude. Okay, so I'm showing right now a map where we can see the Tropic of Cancer is very close to Cuba, like near Havana. Okay, that's like just the Tropic of Capricorn runs just north of Cuba, right? But I'm showing a moon who in this moment, which was January 11th, 2025, a Gemini moon, like Amanda's Gemini moon or my own, or today we're recording this on a different day than you'll receive it, but the moon's in Gemini and out of bounds, right? So out of bounds either means south of the Tropic of Capricorn, where the sun could never dream to go, or north of the Tropic of Cancer, where the sun could never dream to go. All right? And in the moment that I'm showing, which was January 11th, 2025, 10:57 p.m. in Orlando, Florida, the moon was like directly above Orlando, right? It had an altitude, this means of like 90 degrees. The convention of altitude, the horizon is 0 degrees, and 90, the zenith is right above our head. So in Hawaii, where Amanda lives, the moon can zenith often and does a couple of times a month. Actually, the sun zeniths twice a year. Some call this Lahaina noon, a day without shadows, because the midday sun is right above our heads, right? The moon can break out of the bounds and even be directly overhead in places that the sun can never be. The overhead sun only ever happens if you live in the tropics, because the sun is bound between the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer. Florida's not in the tropics. It's about 5 degrees north of the Tropic of Cancer. Oh, 5 degrees, that same distance that the moon snakes north and south of the sun's path every month. But there are particular months that are quite interesting, and they're when the north node is at 0 Aries, or like in the chart that I'm showing here, 2957 Pisces. Okay, because what happens then is if the northern crossing is at that first degree of Aries, then the place where the moon peaks to its northern extreme above the sun's path is going to be at 0 Cancer. And that's already the point of the zodiac that is most north. Do you see? So we're taking most north and we're adding another 5 degrees to it. This is why north node at 0 Aries is the lunar maximums. When the north node's at 0 Aries, the south node's at 0 Libra, that means the southern bending is at 0 Capricorn, which is already the point of the zodiac that is most south of Earth's equator, the Tropic of Capricorn. And so at this time, when the north node's at 0 Aries, then we have our southern extremes as well, okay? That's what the lunar maximums mean. Now, why did I choose Orlando? Because I believe the spaceship Earth at Epcot Center at Disney World might just be some kind of Masonic ritualistic device built to honor this amazing overhead moon thing that happens for a period of time every 18.6 years. But then again, Gemini bread is also Scorpio Joe. So maybe that's not true. This was a pretty cool place of scientific discovery for me when I was a kid, and I went once upon a time, and it's based upon the great and beautiful sacred geometrical work of Buckminster Fuller, great humanitarian and forward thinker. And they call it Spaceship Earth, but it's silver, and I think it's Spaceship Moon. And on that date that I showed on January 11th, 2025, the moon was exactly above this place in that moment. All right. And I actually am now inclined to investigate other places that are like 28.5 degrees from the equator, because in these lunar extremes, then the moon will directly overhead. And by the way, the tea that I'm drinking, I'm always drinking, is from Yunnan province in China, which is in that band. And where tea, like there are many traditions where they'll bring the tea out as they age it under full moons and such, there would actually be in the 18.6-year cycle opportunities to like age the cakes under the beautiful overhead moon.
Okay, Brett. So I've heard you say a few things that in terms of like translating this for us, I mean, this has been epic, actually. Like the visuals that you've created, the way that you're describing this. And if you're still here and you've been a little bit lost at moments, I want to stand as a example of what's possible. Not that I'm getting every single thing that Brett says, but I have to say that it has been years of listening to Brett, and I'm finally tracking a lot of what you say, but it's taken a long time. So
yeah, it's amazing to have witnessed your wish to hear these things, because, is this astrology is an interesting question. And your commitment to seeing it through, even though this gets confusing and over technical. And yeah, it's like that. It's also like that with astrological things. It takes us a while. It takes us some practice, So I appreciate that. I've also gotten better at teaching it along the years too.
Yeah, you're practicing that a lot.
So let me take you now to this really amazing place in Scotland. I have not yet been. It's been a very important place in the tradition of my first teacher, who's Daniel Gemario, who kind of just happened there during lunar maximums and when the moon was entering Capricorn, which is when, in many regards, this site is very much turned on. A lot of people have made quests to this sacred series of stone circles there in Callanish, Scotland, during these lunar extremes since, and it's happening now. So the stones are set with a background of a beautiful hillside that they call Sleeping Beauty, because it looks like a goddess laying on her back. And what happens is during these lunar extremes, the moon will walk the land. Now I'm starting the image that you're seeing on the screen from Boulder, Colorado. It just has something to do with the slideshow and places we didn't go. But anyway, in Boulder and all Northern Hemisphere locations, the sun is lowest in the sky at midday when the sun's at the Tropic of Capricorn. That's the furthest it gets from Boulder, so lowest in the sky, right? Well, Boulder's at 40 degrees north. Just makes the math easy. I went to school there for a bit. There's a road called Baseline that's on the 40th parallel, 40 degrees north of the equator. It's pretty cool. Well, of course, it's not the only place 40 north of the equator. Somewhere in Nevada and California and the Philippines, and we're going all the way over here to Spain. All right, so the same latitude, right? The same distance north of the equator, right? I live 38 degrees north of the equator in the Bay Area of California. I have the same sky as Athens, Greece, but I'm experiencing what they see 10 hours later, right? So anyway, Scotland's not experiencing the same sky as Boulder, Colorado, or as Spain, because it is crazy far north, right? So especially Callanish, it's at like the very northern peak of the Scottish Isles in the Upper Hebrides, the islands up there, okay? It's at a latitude of, I'll wait until the slide shows, because it's real far. Anyway, it's much, much further than the Tropic of Capricorn. So the Capricorn solstice, or the solstice sun, is even lower in the Scottish sky than it is in the skies of Spain. Does that make sense? It's like literally further away and it's lower in the sky. And that's why the seasons are more extreme for locations that are further from the equator. Right? Amanda's in Hawaii. She's just picking avocados off trees all year long. It's not like that in Scotland, right? Okay. Well, not only is like the sun lower in the sky, but the moon every month when it reaches Capricorn gets lower in the Scottish sky than it does in the Spanish sky. And especially when the north node's at 0 Aries, because then the southern bending where the moon gets most south, it's another 5 degrees south of the Tropic of Capricorn. And it's so far south that in Scotland, in Callanish, the moon then just walks on Sleeping Beauty. It just walks the land. And there's all these beautiful poetic prophecies about, like speaking with Daniel Jamari about this is awesome because he's met all sorts of magical folk there who speak about like the powers and the magic of these things. Okay. Well, I want to encourage all of you to really witness the height of the sun at midday throughout the course of the year. By the way, if you're looking at a chart, like on your phone app or whatever, that's just the sun on the midheaven. sun on the MC degree. I really also want to encourage you to have a sky practice with sunrise and sunset. Amanda and I are both very fortunate. We're living in places right now where we get to see the sunset every day that the clouds allow. And I'm showing some pictures on the screen here from my own house of, in the middle frame, an equinox sunset where the sun sets due west. Okay, but in the top frame, the sun's in Cancer, right? When the sun both rises most north of east and sets most north of west. So where we live, we have these, I call them the eucalyptus goalposts. The sun only sets in between those two eucalyptus trees at summer solstice or Cancer solstice or northstice. Fun fact, in our house, I have to go into Koa's room, who was born with the sun in Cancer, if I want to get a photo of that, because he's the only one with a window looking in that direction, okay? In the bottom of this image, you'll see in the very left why I call that hill Solstice Hill. And the sun is illuminating the place I call the birthing tree, right? Because out of the longest night, the sun is reborn. Sing a Christmas song if you'd like. And so the sun illuminates the birthing tree on Solstice Hill only in one moment each year, which is the southstice, or the sun ingressing Capricorn, the place that's most south, right? Well, every year, whether you're watching sunsets or sunrise, you'll see that the sun is dancing north and south of the cardinal direction, either east on the ascendant side or west on the descendant side. And this is the motion of the crab. And at solstice, the sun will stop and turn around, and like a crab who walks sideways, living at the tidal places where the ocean walks sideways, you get to see that crab-like motion. Now, why did I talk about the goat climbing the mountain? Why am I talking about this crab-like motion of the standstill of the sun each year? Because I am suggesting that these archetypes were not about the constellations. I believe these dots were connected, the stars, and with lines that drew these pictures that look kind of like a crab and kind of like a goat, because that's what the sun does at these seasonal turnings.
So you think it's the other way around, not that you think it's based on the sun and the sun's movement more than we made pictures in the sky and then we got the zodiac from there.
Right. So most astrological historians will tell us that the original zodiacs were about the constellations. And they were, and as I shared 6 hours ago now, that was the moon, following the moon through the stars, because you can't follow the sun through the stars practically, right? When the 12 sign zodiac came forward, because, for example, in the Mula Pin, which is like the old Babylonian codes where we find these signs on the path of the moon or the constellations on the path of the moon, they were also measuring the length of shadow of a stick throughout the year. That is tropical. And nobody talks about that I hear in the astrological circles. They were also talking about the realm of the heavens, that is Enlil versus Anu versus Enki. And by the way, I don't know if I'm ahead of the game here, but you can edit it out. I will be showing up in Astrology Hub's Inner Circle again this year for the Sagittarius lunation at the end of the calendar year. And I will be talking about that and bringing folks into declination in a very different way, and the power of planetary parallels and much more. Okay, but this is also in this oldest record from the Chaldean astrologers from Babylon. And Leo was a god of the air, and so it's stuff that's really high. And Ea or Enki of the earth, stuff that's really low. Okay, well, that's also tropical. All right, so like it wasn't all sidereal. And as far as I'm concerned, yeah, like the archetype of the goat was all about the one that climbs the mountain and then comes back down. The archetype of the crab was all about this back and forth sideways like motion that you can experience the sun do on your horizon every year, or you can see the moon do it every month. So if you followed the moon, you're like, wait a second, I swore the moon rose over there a couple days ago. Now it's way over there. Like, what? And it's because the moon is moving through the signs, and the signs have houses on the horizons, because the tropical zodiac is a directional device. The moon can rise and set in places that are further south than the most southern sun, that's the Capricorn sun, ever can, and rise and set further north than the most northern sun, that's the Cancer sun, ever can, because the moon's path is not tied to the sun's path. The moon can add 5 degrees in either direction. By the way, in the horizons, that can stretch much more depending on where on Earth you're looking from, okay? And so we get this crab-like motion of the moon. Well, the moon is the one that we say keeps her house in the sign of Cancer. All right, so we should see it from the moon, perhaps even more so. And we have many places on Earth, including here in the land that I live, now called the United States, right? Like this. This is Chimney Rock in Colorado, where we see archaeological evidence of construction in 18.6-year periods. Now that's a little too precise, but it's seeming in this 18.5-year period where they would be constructing on these sacred sites of the Kivas. Why? Because only every 18.5 years is the moon far enough north to rise between the two rocks of the chimney.
Okay, so Brett, this is a comment I made with Kaylin. This wasn't just for fun, that they were making these monuments with exact mathematical precision based on this movement of the sky, of the moon and the sun. Why? Like, what's the point?
Well, we've been talking about it this whole time, but I'm going to, before I answer that question, I'm going to take us to a few other ancient sites, just to show you that in Chimney Rock, like, that's not the only place. And I'm so glad to hear Kaylin was speaking about this too. Here's another site that's this is near Columbus, Ohio, called Newark Earthworks, that had alignments to all of these extreme north and south risings and settings of the moon over the 18.6-year cycle. This one preserved, unlike most of these mounds, because it's now a golf course. Called Mound Builders Golf Course. I have been there. Interestingly, above the clubhouse, you'll find the Freemason logo. But anyway, that maybe brings me back to Epcot Center. I don't mean to do that. There are other sites like, well, I've seen some, I believe, in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Okay, I've made some measurements in Google Earth and stuff that suggest that Stonehenge has these alignments. Of course they would. And there's a very significant shift that's happening in academic circles, which is finally honoring that, yeah, of course the ancients knew more about how the sun and the moon work, because that's what they were doing. And they were more dependent upon it because they couldn't look at an iPhone calendar or something like that, right? It took decades and decades and decades for researchers in the UK to finally get academia to agree that Stonehenge wasn't just some sacrifice place by the heathens who nobody knows how they even got the stones there. They came from very, very far away, or stacked them in this amazing regard. But like that they were actually measuring the equinoxes and the solstices, so that sun every year, but also it would seem that the lunar standstill cycle was honored there too. Well, why? I don't know. How about tides and surface temperatures and El Niños and other things that will completely affect your life? Now, Daniel Jamaro often like he invokes this image of like Neolithic Woodstock, he calls it, where you have people kind of gathering. We do see in many of these sites, you know, like mica from Brazil and shells from Mexico. And like people were coming from all over the world to kind of congregate together in some of these places where there were these alignments. In Hawaii, obviously, as you know, Amanda, they were keeping a moon phase calendar, which is Earth, Moon, and Sun, right? You live on Haleakala, in the house of the sun. You're looking at Haleakala, the house of the moon. So not only can you see the sunset every day of the year, but the moon as well. And if you traced where the moon is setting on the West Maui Mountains, as they call them, right, you would literally see over 18.6 years the moon getting to these extremes. You think the Hawaiians weren't aware of that back in the day? Of course they were. Why would they track that? Well, do you think the tides are important to a seafaring culture, right, who depends upon the ocean for their livelihood and food and for when they make the great journey to Tahiti or Samoa, as we call these places today, or anywhere else? What about surface temperatures? I mean, the way that the winds are going to work, right, to fill your sails, like this is hugely dynamic. And by the way, if you want, we could get even more tidal, because I could tell you things like, well, what happened near January 11th, 2025? Here's the most tidal word in the world: Trump, his second inauguration. All right, well, if you go to the other side of this cycle, that was the golden escalator when Trump first announced his candidacy for US president for his first election. All right, I have slides around this I probably won't show, but if you want, I can speak to you about the clear connection between mundane effects in our world that we're experiencing now in 2025 with North Node at this Aries Pisces cusp, the east point, and take it back to North Node at the west point, the Libra Virgo cusp, right? Which was like November 11th, 2015.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the correlations or correspondences are not just things like the actual tide, things like the actual surface temperature, but that there are also effects that happen in our everyday reality that are also quote unquote tidal or affecting the temperature of our experience. And so
Our socioeconomical tides, our political tides, our cultural tides, all of these things are connected. And of course they are. We're astrologers. But if I can show the rationalists this, maybe they would even for a moment say, like that seems kind of real. So, I love it when I get around the woman that you described on your boat trip, because they use this straw man argument of your signs aren't even aligned to the stars and they never can be. And I'm like, well, let me show you what the tropical zodiac is. And I hit them with the Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer and Tropicos and all these things we've done. And they're like, wait, like that's actually kind of a thing. If they've listened for that long, many of them will just laugh and run away, right? Well, then I can show you how the ancients knew this too. And at sites like Chimney Rock and Newark Earthworks and Callanish and Stonehenge and places all around the world, they were not only aligning with equinox and solstice, of course they were, because you need to keep the days if you want to survive, but they were also aligning to this 18.6-year cycle of moon reaching these extremes. Why? Well, how about because it affects the tides and the surface temperature and the mosquito blooms. That probably really, really, really mattered back in the day before repellent. I don't use that stuff. But whatever, but what about like the tides of the socioeconomic trends? So if you're in kind of clan life, you might want to know when it's more likely to get invaded.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? And people these days, like, we don't even think about the phases of the moon. Like, right? Well, like why you wouldn't travel at new moon time, because you can't see in the night before street lights, unless the big light, which is called the moon, is in the sky. Do you see what I'm saying? And there might be robbers on the road or just potholes, right? And so like trying to stay human, like can be one of the great ways is as simple as start looking up and reconnect to the cycles and consider what this would have been in ancient times. So before I get into a list, if we want to go there, because it's going to trigger some of us, I want to just say this. We are still in the lunar standstill. When the North Node reaches 0 Aries, it's really like the year leading into it and the year leading out of it. So 2024, 2025. Every month, as the moon, every tropical month, which is 27.3 days, as the moon goes to the northern extreme, 5 degrees north of the Tropic of Cancer, in the moon's case, to the southern extreme, 5 degrees south of the Tropic of Capricorn, in the moon's case, you're going to see the highest moons you've ever seen. You're going to see the moon so low, you're like, wait, what? Now, that's like, it's not as apparent because, of course, we get to see the moon rising and setting. It's just as low as she gets visibly, right? But if you know how to track the midheaven, and that's a tale for another time, you'll notice that the moon is in this lower place than the sun can ever be. Like I'm in northern hemisphere, so when the moon's moving into Capricorn, the moon is literally lower in my sky at midday than the sun ever can be. Like I track shadows throughout the year. The moon is now casting longer shadows than the sun ever can at the midheaven. And that's an intriguing thing. And everybody, like thousands of years ago, who are pioneering our craft, who are following the shadow of the stick in the ground, they certainly would have known this. Now, why? Because it's cool to know and it's academic? No. So let me just share some examples with y'all, okay? But I just want to say 2 final things, and we'll get to speak about this, and I won't get so nerdy when we're in our event together. We'll have this document. I'll say, hey, just go look to that if you want to learn some more of the astronomy of the thing, okay? But the most important thing I can say, which I will certainly say then, is the alarms are going off. Let's not edit that out. That's right. Like if things feel scary and crazy tidal and you're overwhelmed and it's high highs and low lows, whether it's way inside your house or way outside, like of course turn the TV off, but also know that it's meant to be tidal right now. You will weather this. You might want to look back to 1987, 88. Look back to 2006 and 2007, I guess would be the best time to describe that. And see if that wave has been real in your life. That in the other kind of troughs of the cycle, which also when we're looking at like tidal levels and things like this aren't necessarily troughs, you might have also experienced some interesting kind of super tidal vibes then. And so that was, North Node was in 0 Libra in 78, in 1997. And then recently, November 11th, 2015. So the years of really 2014, the node moved into Libra, got 0 Libra in November of 2015 through 2016. Okay, and if I compare events now, North Node 0 Aries Lunar Maximum, to then North Node 0 Libra Lunar Minimum, I think you're going to see that some of these things correspond.
Brett, in 1978, and then I actually think my divorce was finalized in 2015, the year that Astrology Hub started. I think that's when we actually finalized the divorce, and it might have been November. I need to go look back.
Right. So what sign is your node in, your North Node?
Libra.
Right. So you're born in the so-called lunar minimums. So is Koa, by the way. Mm-hmm. Right. So my partner, Anna, who I met through Astrology Hub, worked with Astrology Hub since the beginning in 2015. She had her son Koa then. All right. So she had Koa during her nodal reversal. And our baby Maya was born during her nodal return.
Wow.
And it's not shocking for Anna to be more nodal. And Koa as well, like his sister arrived at his nodal reversal, right? Because he, like you, North Node 0 Libra, and now North Node 0 Aries, because they have the nodes at the equinox points. And so they are beings, and many of you listening will be as well, who are kind of more tied to the cycle. Now, by the way, maximums and minimums aside, there's a time in the 18.6-year cycle when the moon can't go out of bounds. That was true when you were born, Amanda, for me as well. And there's a time when the moon starts going out of bounds in the 18.6-year cycle. Well, let me give you a couple dates. August 15th, 2001. First out of bounds moon of that 18.6-year cycle. I wonder what happened in September of that year. How about March 4th, 2020? I wonder what happened at that time, and the answer is we were all getting locked down. And by the way, we were getting locked down by laws that were put in place in 2001. And speaking of, things are going to get a little bit hairy here, friends. I might as well just put this image on the screen as I go into some of the mundane or socio-political times and signs of our time. So I'm not going to, we don't even have time, or way over time here. I'm not going to opine on any of this stuff. I hope you will resist the temptation to just turn this off, because I might be saying words that sound like, oh, the alt-right, whatever, conspiracy, whatever, and all the things you're being told to think when you hear these triggering words. I just want to share facts from the waves of this cycle, and I would ask you to do with them what you will, and maybe go take a look. All right, so when Astrology Hub came together, and it's when we met as well, we were in the other side of this cycle. So it was your lunar return, nodal return time, right? North Node 0 Libra, the so-called lunar minimums. There was a blood moon tetrad in the year of 2014 and 2015, 4 consecutive blood moons or total lunar eclipses. There was a lot of talk about Israel at that time. Of course, as there is now, it wasn't just talk. In 2014, there was a very significant war between Israel and Gaza. All right. And in 2015, there was a really kind of high point in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that's known as the Intifada of the individuals. All right. It was right when the North Node changed. All right. Well, I think Israel and Gaza are in the news now. Absolutely, right? 2015, often known as the year of a really significant European migrant crisis. Interesting. Caitlyn Jenner came out as a trans woman in April of 2015. The Paris Agreement, right, which Donald Trump has just taken the U.S. off of, signed in 2016. Speaking of Trump, who was born literally during a lunar eclipse and shortly after the moon went out of bounds, as I mentioned before, 2025, of course, the second inauguration that happened just after the North Node passed the East Point. 2015, when he first put his name in for nomination for president. You may know that Trump was an actor, right? Playing the big boss on The Apprentice. He got his Hollywood star January 16th, 2007. Is the most recent lunar maximum before this one. He was recently found acting pretty bossy in the White House during a meeting with Vladimir Zelensky. Did y'all know that? Sorry, not Vladimir, but Zelensky was also an actor. He won the first season of Dancing with the Stars in Ukraine. That was 2006, during our last lunar maximums. And in 2015, during the lunar minimums of this same wave, he was playing the president on TV, right? You can still see this on Netflix. It's called Servant of the People, where Zelensky was a school teacher who was avidly against the corruption in Ukraine and ended up becoming, like, riding that into presidency, all right? Well, speaking of corruption in Ukraine, right, these are some of the things that we heard from Putin is his claims of why he invaded. Now, the things he was saying very publicly was that Ukraine cannot become part of NATO. I mean, NATO, we already have missiles that can destroy Russia, 40 minutes away as far as the missile flies. Right, and Ukraine's even closer than Romania, Poland, yada, yada. But Putin was also speaking about the corruption of Ukraine and denazifying Ukraine. Now you say those things now, and it's just like conspiracy theory, conspiracy theory. Well, go look at some of the headlines from Western press about Ukraine in 2014 and 2015. You're going to see the exact same things. Putin was also speaking about the bioweapons. All right, so this has all been debunked as complete conspiracy theory. But then in a congressional hearing, Victoria Nuland came out and said, yeah, Ukraine has biological research facilities, which in fact we are quite concerned Russian troops, Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach, okay? That was while she was being asked a question by Senator Rubio, who of course is now Secretary of State. Yes, well, John Kerry was
2015, she was being asked those questions. And then
2015 is not when she was being asked those questions. But I just wanted to say that Putin was defending the invasion. However, if you follow that rabbit hole, which you have to wade through a bunch of this is just utter conspiracy theory, yada, yada, and get into some of the funding, which is being made public now, right? Thanks to the most hated man in the universe, Elon Musk seems to hold that title. You'll see that a lot of the funding, and actually through USA, though it's very difficult to follow, was started in some of these Ukrainian biolabs back then, also to Wuhan, China. Speaking of Musk, who will have a very important kind of lunisolar event coming up for him, as all 54-year-olds do very soon. The Falcon 9 was certified by the National Security Space Launch in 2015, which was allowing SpaceX to contract launch services to the Air Force for any payloads classified under national security. So Musk, who's now in the White House, right, he first got his national security clearance back then, and that's when SpaceX first started getting government contracts, okay? So Ukraine then and now is a very interesting thing. Like if you know your history or do your research, and it can be hard to find these things, Nuland was actually present for a coup that happened in Kiev in Ukraine in 2014, which took out the democratically elected president Viktor Yanukovych then, right? This maybe led to Russia's annexation of Crimea, which was in 2014 as well, right? So there's just a lot that was happening in Ukraine back then. And Nuland was present for that. Hunter Biden's pardon dated back to 2014. I wonder why. Well, one of the reasons might be, I don't know, but this is a fact that he joined Burisma, which is a Ukrainian energy company, in 2014. Wonder why Fauci was dated back to then. Well, you can find plenty of papers online like this one, Lab-Made Coronavirus Triggers Debate. The creation of a chimeric SARS-like virus as scientists discussing the risks of gain-of-function research. That was an article from November 16th, 2015. Again, the nodes changed November 11th, 2015 in the Scientist magazine. All right, and if you follow some of that funding, you're going to find some really interesting thing. And there's plenty of papers that will show you 2014, 2015 is like very eventful times in, let's just say biolab research, okay? Now there's 46 labs in the Ukraine. This has come out. Many people will say it hasn't come out. It's triggering information we're getting into here. How about the measles? Like that's all in the news right now. And interesting to have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the head of HHS, who said some things about vaccines you might expect he would not. But he did say in the statements that I think most people who deem him anti-vax as surprising, he did speak about the choice And this was something that was taken away in California in 2015 following an outbreak in Disneyland in December of 2014 that spread to Canada, Mexico, and 7 of the United States. That California shortly thereafter became the first state to take away personal belief exemptions for children in public and private schools. 2015, the other side of this same cycle. I wonder what will happen now. All right. I could go on and on like that, but I think that's enough. And I appreciate anyone who survived all of that to make it to this. This is why we align our stone circles. It's not only because the tides of the water without, it's because of the tides of the water within. And who knows the hearts of humans? You know what I'm saying? And some will only get really high tide and do much more beautiful and charitable things. Some might get very low tide and bring us into some pretty scary SHIT, right? And I think it would be good for us to track these things personally and culturally. Because again, like if it's as simple as it's linked to the Santa Ana winds, we'll keep the reservoirs filled.
Brett, this is definitely going to take us into a rabbit hole, so we don't need to go there. But as you were showing a lot of the visuals, I was thinking, does this ever make you just feel like we're in some mathematical algorithm?
Yeah, well, many things do. And I find simulation theory, you know, like Musk, who came up before, he's pretty interesting in that he's, I think, pretty adamantly convinced that we're in a simulation. And then yet also has this drive to get us to Mars so that the human species can survive in case there's a, you know, cataclysmic event here on Earth. It's like, well, why, if you know you're in a video game, why do you need to perpetuate the species? And the answer might just be because you got to win the game, even if it's a game. I mean, the simulation theory would be a really wonderful conversation for another time. Maybe it will come up actually in our panel, because with Pluto now in Aquarius and Uranus heading into Gemini for their soon coming trine, some of the AI and the other kind of, you know, artificial, and if it is, and digital and all those things are going to come up more. And, you know, if I did find out I was in a video game, I would just keep trying to win.
Well, it's what's the definition of winning? I think that's the main.
What's the definition of a game? Yeah, so I had no idea. I will say the whole thought makes me uncomfortable, and but it makes me uncomfortable in the same ways that horary astrology makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. All right. Well, Brett, thank you so much. That was just like, wow, epic. Thank you for going into all of that detail and for helping us see it and understand it, and understand why we also may be feeling tidal, why we also may be feeling these extremes, why that just means you're aligned with a natural cycle that is, and you're right where you need to be. And we will be discussing lots and lots of ideas for how to stay as anchored in this time as possible, but also as fluid in this time as possible, to both stay within yourself, but also flow where you need to and when you need to. So it's a tricky dance. I don't think any of us have the answer, but we will certainly be using astrology to help us find the clues and find the insights and find the awareness that we need. So I'm super grateful, Brett, that you're going to be there doing this with us on Tuesday, March 18th. Full panel event, 2 hours, give as you wish. What you give enables those who can't give. So thank you for those who can. Thank you for those who can't. Thank you for everybody for your interest. Just we're grateful to have the time together and be alive at this amazing moment in time together, and to be exploring these mysteries and trying to figure out what the heck is going on. So thank you for all of that, Brett. You're awesome. I love you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Love you too. I love this community. I will say this is a really wonderful time to make sure that you are communicating, sharing. If things have been heavy, if you're afraid, if you're scared, it's a great time to receive a reading. If astrology speaks to you, you can find me at Gemini Brett if you'd like to do that with me. If you're in Astrology Hub's inner circle, make sure you use your discount code. Which you will find in the places that you know how to, because you are in the inner circle. And, so the socioeconomic wave is interesting. I was just looking at the Bitcoin price in 2015. It's hilarious. It's like 200 something bucks. Right. So times are tight and everybody's feeling that. Astrologers have been feeling that too, because I think, obviously eating is a much higher priority than receiving a reading. But we should make sure, and I say this to myself as well, that we're still like receiving counsel, advice, being heard, having a safe place to express our fears and some of our challenges, because they're really meant to be alive right now. So even if it's tight for you right now, I would say this is probably going to be a more important time for you to receive counsel in any way that works for you. Yes, it's a really good time for a reading. And you can find me along with a lot of amazing astrologers at astrologyhub.com/connect. Is that right, Amanda, for people to access Astrologer Connect? Be a really good time for you to share some of your pains and your fears and to really be heard. So you can find me there, and I would be happy to help in any way that I can. Thank you.
Yeah, self-care, taking care of yourself, prioritizing yourself, prioritizing rest, prioritizing, nature, movement, air, sunlight, those very basic things. Yeah.
Yeah, which we just don't consider them nearly enough. I don't. And it's always good to be reminded. And, Astrology Hub, I think, is great at doing this for us. And this is a cycle. And this is why we build the stone circles and all that. And the time is now. The stone circles are activated. So am I. So are you. Let's be good to ourselves. Thank you, Amanda.
All right. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. Can't wait to see you on Tuesday, March 18th. All the links for everything we've talked about are in the show notes. We'll catch you on the next episode.